All right, huzzah, huzzah, friends. The United the Seven Kingdoms has hit the fan. That's right, friends. David lights all the candles this time, Bringer. Here with you for some more candle ASMR and mythology, as is our wont, style. Idiom, sir, that's the word. And yes, the shit has hit the fan, and the true structure of the story has been revealed. It's a story about a hero slaying a dragon to save a princess, a story as old as time, and one that's right at the heart of the story of the Hedge Knight and the larger story that George is telling. It's also time to talk hashtag Team Smallfolk. That's right, I'm not only the president, I'm also the client, because Dunk slugging Aerion in the face only to be arrested is the class war. And actually, and this is the main point of the video, George has skillfully combined the themes of the Dragon Slayer legends with the class war to give us haughty, up-jumped Targaryens in need of a good pop in the mouth. And that means we get to talk about two of my very favorite things in one video, which would be Dragon Slayer Legends and hashtag Team Smallfolk. This was a natural and brilliant harmonization on George's part, because there is very much a common theme between the old Dragon Slayer legends and the medieval phenomena of the feudal lord or king ruling over the common people from a castle on a hill. Basically, either way, it's an oppressive force that just kind of showed up one day, took up residence on a hill that's very hard to assault, and then proceeded to rule over and exploit the local populace, who lacks the arms necessary to overthrow the oppressor, until a hero comes along, finds the strength to pop that dragon in the mouth and save the princess. And I do hereby apologize to both Mariah Carey and Quinn's ideas, my friend. Big Mariah Carey fan, I'm sorry, I am sorry. But this is a very old story, the Dragon Slayer hero, as old as 10,000 years in fact, and we find it all over the world, from the Norse sagas to the Vedas to the Enuma Elish to the Old Testament. Or in more modern times, we find it in places like the plot of A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, and also The Hobbit, and also Sleeping Beauty, and also Mario Brothers. That's right, Bowser is the dragon, you gotta slay the dragon to save the princess. And the witch Maleficent takes the final form of a dragon, you may recall, before she is slain. So I guess we can just call her Tiamat Targaryen. Anyway, thanks very much for clicking on my video. We appreciate that you do have choices out there. And now let me show you how George has skillfully used the Dragon Slayer legend as the framework for Dunk's story and for A Song of Ice and Fire as a whole, or at least a large part of it, with a special shout out to the Frankish and Norman ancestors of William the Conqueror, who basically invented castles. All right, dragons and tyrants. So yeah, dragons, castles, brave heroes with swords, princesses in need of rescue. This is pretty much core fantasy folklore stuff and just plain old folklore stuff that George is cooking with. And let's start with the low-key hilarious framing of the Targaryens that we get from the perspective of one Raymond Fossaway, who says to Dunk, "Aerion's vain and cruel. The Targaryens are tyrants who burned our lands and enslaved our people. They're incestuous aliens, Duncan." That's basically true. They are incestuous aliens, and they did burn a lot of people at the Field of Fire, and now they rule over Westeros. So, theory accepted. Now, like any symbol, the dragon can be seen in totally different ways by different cultures. So, for example, most Western, or if you want to say Proto-Indo-European derived folklore, as well as ancient Middle Eastern folklore, will generally have the dragon as an oppressive force, which is hoarding women, cattle, gold, or even the nourishing waters of rain and flood. While Eastern mythology will more often present the dragon as a symbol of knowledge, enlightenment, power, and transcendence. Now, I'm happy to report to you that George uses both of these ideas in different places. And if you want to deep dive on the positive aspects of the dragon and how they are reflected in Dany's story in particular, then check out the video Vedic Indian Origins of Dany and Drogon. But today we're dealing with the perspective that Raymond Fossaway gave us of the dragon as an oppressive alien force that men can really neither understand nor meaningfully oppose until a hero comes along. So the simplest way to sum this up may be by comparing the Targaryens ruling Westeros from atop Aegon's high hill to Smaug, the dragon Smaug, living in the caverns of Lonely Mountain, aka Erebor, and taking whatever he likes from the surrounding populace. Originally, Erebor, as many of you will know, was the mountain stronghold of the dwarves known as the Kingdom Under the Mountain. And the King Under the Mountain is actually a different mythological motif referring to the idea of a hidden king like, Aragorn or Jon Snow. But the point for today is that Smaug, I'm just going to call him Smog. I'm sorry. But yeah, Smog, he took over Erebor, took over that huge hoard of dwarven gold, and now he cannot be rooted out, except for, by some brave hero, or actually a pair of heroes. It was Bilbo and Bard the Archer who sort of teamed up with a little hat tip assist to the Thrush that took the news of the chink in the armor from Bilbo to Bard, and the rest is history. Similarly, the Targaryens came from across the Narrow Sea from Valyria, and then later from Dragonstone across the bay, and then they conquered Westeros with fire and blood and now rule over everyone from atop, again, Aegon's high hill. One of the dragons was actually shot down, Smog-like, but the main point for today is just the setup of the dragon living up on the mountain that everyone lives in fear of. And yes, Benedict Cumberbatch absolutely should voice Balerion if he ever needs a speaking part. That would be great. Let's get the mocap sensors. All right, why castles? Why castles? Indeed, they look cool. They're hard to build though, so why? Well, as I mentioned at the top, the entire point of medieval castles is basically to facilitate the class war against the common people, of course. The purpose of a castle is the same as a dragon's cave. Hoarding. A castle allows the lord or king to hoard riches, food, and other resources which have been extracted from the local populace, and they can also hoard or monopolize the use of heavy force. So anytime the local lord needs to collect taxes or put their foot down, they can just have their armored knights ride out in force to lay down the law, with that law being might makes right, aka pay taxes or die. This sort of medieval castle feudal lord setup is basically a Frankish innovation that William the Conqueror, Duke of Normandy, took to Britain when he conquered it, which is quite fitting since obviously the story of Aegon the Conqueror is partially inspired by William's conquest of Britain. As always with matters pertaining to medieval history, I will recommend The Rest is History podcast, who has a fantastic multi-part series on the Battle of Hastings, a couple of episodes which cover William the Conqueror and the origin of castles. And again, all we need to talk about for today is the basic setup of the feudal lord living in a fortified position on a hill so they can dominate the surrounding area, and how that's basically the same setup as the dragon living in a mountain cave. So obviously, pretty much all of Westeros's feudal lords are doing this routine on some level, but it is folklorically poignant and kind of brilliant story writing for George to have made the first dynasty to conquer and rule over all of Westeros people who call themselves dragons, because it shows that George understands the workings and dynamics both of Dragon Slayer legends and medieval castles. So in order to win the class war in Westeros, Team Smallfolk would essentially have to both slay the dragon and overthrow the king. Now, the Pitchfork Mob is basically the symbol of the power of the Smallfolk, right? That's the threat that the castle was designed to insulate the lords against. The weapons available to the common people aren't fancy, or even weapons at all. It's the farmer's pitchfork and the woodsman's axe, or even just sharpened pieces of wood, or clubs, or rocks. The power of the Pitchfork Mob, so to speak, is in their numbers, in the overwhelming force of the mob. So the ability of the common people to choose whether to assemble, storm the hill and overthrow the lord, or to carry on with their daily lives and pay taxes is essentially the foundation of what's known as the feudal contract. The aim of a wise lord or king is to provide enough benefit and protection to their people that they're happier paying taxes and working the fields than, again, assembling in a mob and marching up the hill. This dynamic is sometimes also referred to as the consent of the governed. You've probably heard that expression, which is just this veto power that the common people can exercise simply by ceasing to put up with the rule of their overlord. This dynamic basically always exists anytime a small group of people holds power over everyone else, and this is true no matter what form of government we're talking about or what the laws are. So the more cruel and exploitative any ruling lord or king or president or prime minister, etc., the greater risk they are running of the mob showing up at their gates, pitchfork in hand. And now this dynamic has come into play on a Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. So the Targaryens, as you may have gathered, don't have dragons anymore, and so they are much more vulnerable to overthrow. But don't tell that to Aerion, who of course thinks that his noble dragon blood entitles him to act with impunity. Dunk's big old fist was essentially a tiny piece, not that tiny, but a tiny piece of the Pitchfork Mob, per se, which is why it felt so good to see it connect with Aerion's spoiled, haughty face. Dunk's dressed like a farmer, you guys, so it's the It's the Pitchfork Mob. And just by the way, as an aside, one of the reasons why the wealthy and powerful are able to dominate modern society so thoroughly as they do today is because they have successfully delocalized from the castle on the hill. And so now the Pitchfork Mob, should it want to assemble, most of the time it wouldn't even know where to go. There's no one hill to storm. Anyway, that's all hashtag Luigi's Pitchfork, so let's keep the focus on modern times for now and talk about where these Dragon Slayer legends come from and why there's almost always a princess in need of saving. All right, so why is there always a princess that needs to be rescued from the dragon? Great question. Glad you asked. And the short answer is because a lot of the versions of the Dragon Slayer myth that we have are derived from some sort of proto-Indo-European mythology. And the ancient Yamnaya and subsequent PIE cultures had a habit of sending warrior bands of their young males out to raid cattle and women from neighboring tribes, groups, and peoples, who, being enemies in possession of stuff the warrior bands wanted to steal, became analogized to the dragon of these old Dragon Slayer legends. And when I say old, I mean potentially 8 to 10,000 BC. This is according to the research of scholar John Grigsby, whose work I find very compelling. And according to his research, the original Dragon Slayer legend was about slaying the dragon of darkness by splitting open the horizon and freeing the sun and then giving birth to the land. So the dragon, quote unquote, is nothing more than the darkness of night that joins earth and sky in a wall of impenetrable blackness. The slaying of the dragon is the slash that the sun appears to make across the horizon, and George even uses this language a couple times, comparing that line of sunrise to a fresh wound. And the dragon slayer is usually some kind of storm god who is perceived as using their wind and or their lightning to, again, slice open the darkness, free the sun, and then the various features of the land are often made out of the body parts of the slain dragon, because the features of the land, the rivers and the mountains and lakes and things, do seem to emerge from the darkness once that, again, the wall of darkness is slain. Then what happens is, over time, the story migrated and came into the hands of different people and different cultures and different places, and the thing that the dragon was keeping away from everyone changed based on the different cultures. Or we might say that the things that different people needed to go to war to get became analogized to the storm god's fight against the dragon of darkness to free the sun. So the point isn't really what the dragon has locked away from the rest of us, just that it's something of value and it's something that everyone wants, needs, or even deserves. Like the sunrise or the nourishing rain waters. Or cattle and women, I suppose. Everyone needs those. And then the other reason there's always a princess that needs to be rescued is because the medieval folklorists and storytellers who got their hands on these stories, they just loved a good maiden in a tower trope. So a lot of the dragon slayers from medieval times are kind of locked in on that formula. The Christian influence on medieval Europe also approved as the dragon as a kind of archetypal enemy, since Satan is referred to as the dragon in Revelation. So now if we hop back from the dragon to the comparison with the feudal lord hoarding things in his castle on a hill, it's a very similar situation in that they're going to want to hoard basically any commodity of value, from mineral wealth like gold and silver, to grain and other foodstuffs, to cattle and sheep. The lords often claim rights over the woods so that other people cannot hunt or harvest lumber without their permission. And in fact, right in the prologue of A Game of Thrones, Will, the poacher, was sent to the wall for hunting in the wrong wood without the say-so of the local High Lord. So yeah, the class struggle written into A Song of Ice and Fire from the very first pages. And then finally, in the most extreme cases, the feudal lord will even demand the right to seize women from the local populace. And of course, we see that in Westeros with the very disgusting prima nocta right of the first night business, which the Targaryens definitely participate in. So what we're talking about actually when we say Dragon Slayer myth is actually what's known as the Chaos Kampf myth. And the formulation here is a storm god, again, fighting against a dragon, which he must slay in order to create the world or create a new kingdom or both. As I mentioned, it seems to be a very old legend, even older than the Proto-Indo-European people. In case I didn't make that clear, it seems to have originated in the Middle East and then moved over the Caucasus Mountains onto the steppe and into the hands of the PIE people who then spread it everywhere. But you can also find it in the ancient Middle Eastern folklore such as the folklore of the Babylonians, Sumerians, and Akkadians. It's also in Egyptian mythology, so yeah, it might be 8 or 10,000 years old. And as a result, this Chaos Conf Storm God versus the Dragon structure is found everywhere, from Europe to the Middle East, all the way to China, and all the way to A Song of Ice and Fire, because, as I always like to point out, George is very aware of this, and he's created his own Chaos Conf legend in the form of Robert the Stormlord slaying Rhaegar Targaryen the dragon in the shallows of the River Trident. Robert thought that he was trying to rescue Lyanna, who in Robert's mind was a princess locked in a tower by a dragon. And then just as the storm god usually ascends to some sort of kingship after slaying the dragon, Robert obviously becomes king by overthrowing the Targaryen dynasty. And a great example of this is found in the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian epic, which tells the story of Marduk slaying Tiamat, where Marduk becomes the king of gods after his great deed. Unless you're a Tiamat fan, in which case, boo Marduk. Now, Dunk's fight against Aerion has direct parallels to Robert and Rhaegar and also echoes the Chaos Conf structure. Congratulations if you figured that out while I was talking. Because Dunk is, of course, referred to as a giant many times, and so is Robert. And just as Robert Baratheon and Lionel Laughing-Storm Baratheon and all the rest are Storm Lords, Dunk, he has a warhorse named Thunder. That's the one he will ride into the joust, and someone who rides the thunder and the lightning, is a storm god. And by way of example, Baal and Yahweh, who are both Canaanite storm gods, loosely speaking, they are both referred to as the riders on the storm. And it just kind of makes sense. Where would the storm god be? On top of the storm clouds, throwing his lightning bolts down. So yeah, Dunk rides thunder. He's a giant storm god, just like Robert. And of course, storm gods are always associated with fertility because their storm rains make the ground fertile. And accordingly, Robert, very fertile. He has a bunch of bastards, 16 or 17, I forget which. And very mild spoiler alert, Dunk does seem to have a lot of dunklings scattered around the realm. It's kind of a guessing game. There's little word clues about which one. We know Brienne is a dunkling, Hodor is a dunkling, Gren and Aurochs at the wall seem to be the Cleganes, maybe. And sorry if that's a mild spoiler, Dunk doesn't die in episode 6. He's not Eddard Stark. It's not that kind of show. So yes, both Dunk and Robert, fertile storm god figures. And they both like to fight in streams. If you've read the second Dunk and Egg book, and I won't give you any spoilers, but Dunk does have a fight in a stream, and there are certain parallels to Robert and Rhaegar there. So the most important comparison between Robert and Dunk is, of course, that they are saving a princess by fighting the dragon. Not only is Tanzel Too-Tall Dunk's love interest, and thus his princess, she also plays the role of Fair Jonquil in the Florian and Jonquil play. And I just did a video about how the story of Florian and Jonquil is intentionally being used to frame Dunk's story at Ashford Meadow, with Dunk as the heroic fool, so check that one out in case the YouTube algorithm did show it to you. It hasn't really been doing me any favors lately, but what's going on here is that George, in The Hedge Knight, he has the puppeteers putting on 2 different plays. Serwyn of the Mirror Shield, which is the Dragon Slayer legend, and Florian and Jonquil, who are the most famous lovers in Westerosi history, and both are meant to frame Dunk's story. The show has very faithfully reproduced this dynamic, and I would say it even built upon it. And so here we are talking about Dunk, the thunder-wielding Dragon Slayer. And I did think it was cool that Tanzel actually played the role of Serwyn in the play. We talked about this more on the post-game live stream, so check that out if you want more thoughts on that. And I also went into a comparison between Serwyn of the Mirror Shield and Dunk as a Dragon Slayer in the video called The Unlikely Hero, which was from last week also. And then a few months ago, I did one about all the Dragon Slayer legends in Westeros called Dragon Slayers of Westeros, which, by the way, for a continent with supposedly no dragons in the Age of Heroes, Westeros has a lot of legends about dragon slayers. And that's because there were secret dragons in the Dawn Age before the Long Night at some point. Check out the Origins of Old Town video for that story, if you like that sort of heresy. So yeah, sorry to promo my own videos, but if you like Dragon Slayer stuff, you've come to the right place. So now let's tie together all the stuff we've talked about today and finish by discussing why the Dragon Slayer puppet show was such a vile piece of anti-Targaryen propaganda that absolutely needed to be crushed with an iron fist. I'm kidding, of course. But obviously there is a certain political propaganda implication in anyone performing a puppet show or play or song which casts dragons in the role of cruel oppressors in need of slaying, when the ruling dynasty of Westeros is so very fond of dressing up like big scary dragons. Now, the show has made a bit of a change here in terms of the scale of the puppet show, which is worth pointing out, because in the books, it's, a puppet show-sized puppet show with little puppets. And because of this, Aerion managing to find it and fly off the handle about it really comes off as deranged, especially at first. Then later when Maekar is defending his son Aerion in discussions with Baelor, he also is talking about the potential veiled anti-Targaryen messaging in the puppet show. And we're kind of like, I think you guys could have let that one go, you know? But now with the show choosing to blow up, if you will, the size of the puppet show to a full-on medievalist Ren Fair pyrotechnics display, one which basically becomes the main attraction in the camp at night and draws lots of people to it, well, it creates a little better ambiguity around the issue. Aerion still comes across as violent, cruel, and unreasonable, but it's a little bit more understandable how, Aerion or any Targaryen might view the puppet show as an attempt to foster resentment against the crown and to sow the seeds from which rebellion can be grown. Raymond Fossaway's treasonous tirade about how the Targaryens are, blood magic tyrants and incestuous aliens who burned our lands and enslaved our people and paid no attention to our customs, essentially frames the puppet show in those terms. And of course, House Targaryen did just inflict a civil war upon Westeros only 15 years before the events of the Hedge Knight and Season 1 of A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. That's the Blackfire Rebellion, of course, which, another video promo, I made a video about it. I make a lot of Ice and Fire videos, and you can check that out if you want the full Blackfire Rebellion story. And so yes, without excusing Aerion's overreaction, it does make a certain amount of sense that he or Maekar or any other Targaryen would see the puppet show play as subversive. Now yes, the Serwyn of the Mirror Shield story and all the other Dragon Slayer stories, they've been running around Westeros for thousands of years, long before any Targaryens showed up. But if you think about it, that actually just makes such stories more effective anti-Targaryen propaganda, as they will tend to resonate deep in the consciousness of the common folk who grew up with these stories. Here's the thing that Aerion is missing though. By stepping in to stop the puppet play and abuse Tansel, he's actually stepping right into the villainous role of the dragon from the play. It's almost as if he was trying to show people that yes, the Targaryens, they are the same type of thing as these dragons which cruelly oppress the people and need to be slain so the people can be free. I mean, Aerion basically turns the puppet show into reality as soon as he shows up. So what I'm saying is he's just smart enough to see the potential insult or the way that this play could be used as rebellious propaganda, but not smart enough to see that, lacing that boot up and wearing it plays right into the narrative. So Aerion is trying to rule through cruelty, brutality, and fear, but he doesn't have the dragons to back it up. And since he's basically in the wrong in this situation to assault a puppet girl over a play, at least in the eyes of the common people, he simply comes off as abusive and tyrannical, which is the last thing that the Targaryens want to appear to be. And to this end, Aerion's methods are diametrically opposite of the ruling Targaryen king, the actual Targaryen king of Westeros, King Daeron II, Daeron the Good, and his heir, Baelor Breakspear, who is the highest-ranking Targaryen here at the tourney. And you can see Baelor grimacing, oh my god, as Aerion brings shame upon the house with that dirty trick with the joust, and he even starts a riot. And you can see Aerion barely cares. He's taking the position of House Targaryen for granted and just assuming that it doesn't matter how many citizens he pisses off. It doesn't matter how much he tarnishes their reputation. They'll just always be in power because they have silver hair. So it's really dumb. It undermines House Targaryen. And again, it's the exact opposite of the way that Daeron and Baelor tried to rule, which is through diplomacy, consensus building, grace, honor, dignity, stewardship, justice, good king stuff. So yeah, Aerion undermining all that and basically proving true the sort of talk that Raymond Fossaway is spreading about the Targaryens being tyrannical and stuff. If Raymond is saying that, he's not the only one. And even the part where Raymond says, oh, they don't respect our customs. Technically, Aegon did adopt the faith of the Seven, which is specifically respecting Westeros' customs. However, think back to Lionel's talk about how sacred the jousting and the tourneys are in the Reach especially. Thousands of years old and set out by the first stags who were butting heads. And then here comes Aerion disrespecting the rules of the joust and killing the horse instead of attempting to strike his opponent. So yeah, in every way, Aerion is just proving all of that treasonous talk to be true. And in doing so, he's effectively setting the table for some heroic champion to come along. I don't know if there's anyone like that in the crowd. Oh, there he is, the tall guy. Anyways, thanks for watching, folks. I really do appreciate it. And thanks to everyone who comes out to the post-game live shows. We had a bunch of people here this Sunday. It seems like the show's picking up some steam. We're all having a lot of fun with it. I know I'm really enjoying the way that they're faithfully translating George's archetypes and themes, as you could tell from my recent videos. And by the way, in case you didn't hear, this Sunday's episode of Night of the Seven Kingdoms is actually coming out early because the Super Bowl is this Sunday. So the episode is dropping at 3 a.m. Friday morning / midnight Thursday night for us West Coast people. And so me and Estella and Tim are gonna do our stream on Saturday, early in the day. That'll be noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. We will break down the episode, which comes out on Friday this week. So with that said, thanks for watching, leave a comment, and I'll see you on Saturday.